MediaWiki Authentication. What do you need to do to get your wiki to work with your users? Because you already have users. You just want them to use the wiki. And we're talking about, I'll go back here. Before I start, you should know that this is a just-in-time presentation. I learned from my friend who writes about risk management that this is the proper way to do things. You do them just in time so that if you don't have to do them, for example, if for whatever reason the world falls apart, then you haven't done an unnecessary thing. So, we're here. The presentation is done just in time. Keep that in mind when you see any flaws. So anyway, we're talking about authentication, not authorization. So authentication, just a refresher, is, this is Joe. I know this is Joe because I'm vouching for Joe. I'm not going to tell you what Joe can do. That's your responsibility. Figure out what he's authorized to do. So we're just talking about authentication. I will mention some authorization stuff in here, but mostly just want to make sure you know who the user is. So there are a few different types of authentication that is available. Just in a quick review of MediaWiki.org, I found a few things. The first one, familiar to many people, is remote user. There's a new thing, newish. I'm an old man, so it's newish. Bot passwords. There's LDAP. It's a favorite. SAML. And then there's OpenID Connect, which is based on OAuth 2, which is based on OAuth as a revision of, anyway. So which do you want to use? Well, yeah, he just gave you this laundry. Just pick one. No, you don't do that. So remote user is useful if you already have your user authenticating to the web server somehow. It could be Kerberos, NTLM. It could be, I don't know. One of the clients I have has a CA widget that they drop into Apache, and it's buggy and it drove me crazy, but it takes care of all the authentication and just tells MediaWiki, here's a user, here's everything we know about this user. So yeah, that's one way to do it. Just use remote user and trust the web server to take care of the authentication for you. Yeah, like I said, it does whatever your web server can do. NTLM, which is Windows SSO, Kerberos, which is what NTLM is built on, or whatever else. Bot passwords. So you have a wiki. This is not quite user authentication. This is more like application authentication. If you write a bot, and you want to give that bot the same rights that you have, or maybe a little more restricted subset, because maybe you wrote crappy code and you have bugs and it's going to delete the wiki. You don't want to really delete the wiki, so you want to take away that ability. Anyway, so it takes more configuration if you're using remote user, because you have to intercept the user and figure out when users need to get to bot passwords and when they're authenticated with bot passwords, as opposed to remote user or other authentication systems. But the big bonus here is it's built into MediaWiki. You just go to special bot passwords, create a bot user, get a password. There you go. In big organizations, most of you are familiar with LDAP or Active Directory. So it's a central repository of Microsoft now, I believe, has Azure hosting for, or some tie-in for LDAP so that your Active Directory users can go be synchronized with your Office 365, whatever. Anyway, you can tie MediaWiki into that. LDAP can also give you a few other attributes that you might be interested in for MediaWiki, like the user's gender, their language, groups that they're a member of, email. That can help you with the authorization. The groups can help you with the authorization piece. But the email, time zone, all that other stuff can fill out the user's profile. So you can just say, I'm not going to allow my users to edit their preferences page for language. I'm going to rely on what LDAP says. So yeah, again, this is usually when I do this, I tie it with there's an SSO that is probably remote user on top, but then when you want to populate the user information, you use LDAP queries. That's how I usually do it. And do the authentication, I wrote a LDAP groups extension to do that. So yeah, then there's SAML, which is a nightmare. And I've helped a few people after I went through my own nightmare with it. I helped a few people configure it. So yeah, it's out there. It's widely available. It's a nightmare. Yeah, the hard part is troubleshooting all the errors and stuff that you run into. Because the feedback is very, very difficult. I mean, anyway. I won't regale you with too many nightmare stories. So last night, like I said, this is just in time. Last night I tried out OpenID Connect, which is, first I was going to use OAuth 2 for my talk here, but then Cindy bonked me over the head, and I looked at OpenID Connect, and I was like, wow, this is great, because there's just a URL. You point it to the URL, and it gets all the configuration information it needs from there, and then it can figure out, using Cindy's pluggable auth integrated OpenID Connect extension, you can map your users and whatnot, and it takes care of all that. So yeah, here's in the PDF, each of these is linked, which it goes to, let's see if I can do it on this one. We'll go to an example tenant. Oh, I don't know. Is that authorized? Do we let it? Anyway, there it is. This is JSON blob. If it were better formatted, you could see that it's just telling you, it's just telling the OpenID Connect client where to go to get things. And this is what Microsoft does this for all their Office 365 users. Let's see, go back. Oh no, not go back. Switch back over to there. So, is there a timer? No, because I'm going really fast, and everyone's just happy. Because I'm about done. So, OrcID is. Are there any researchers here with an OrcID? Orchid. Okay, great. You can try this out. I don't have the URL up there. I thought I did, but I guess I didn't. If you go to web.nichework.com/OrchidWiki, just one word, all lowercase, the login there should let you log in on your Orchid. Let's see if I can make it work with my ID. So again, This is all that I put in my local settings file to make this work. That's all I have in there. I don't like the usernames. The usernames here are a string of numbers, but there was no way to, the OrchID interface does not offer emails or good, unique name, so I had to go with their actual ID. Is this loading? I hope it's loading. It's, my server is not that slow, come on. I know it's slow, but anyway, the point is, if this ever loaded, all I would have to do is click the login, and immediately I would be taken to, as a result of those lines of configuration, I would be taken to the OrchID sign-in page. I would sign in there, and then there would be communication, and my OrchID identifier would show up as my username, and I would be logged in. And you could use that to authenticate your users, because there's a few million OrchID users out there. I have a client, Wiki Pathways, who wants to use OrchID to authenticate their users. So, that helps here as well. So anyway, any questions about authentication or what you should use? Do you have any questions, Lex? Because I did this for you.
No, I appreciate the overview. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm glad there's no questions. I guess that means it's good.
Of course there's questions.
So, thanks for the talk. Mark, you have shown the OpenID Connect. Is that right? So have you worked with OpenID also? And can you tell about the difference?
No, it's not built on Sendinos.
OpenID was the first version of the protocol. It is not line compatible with OpenID Connect. So they're essentially same organization developed, but they are not compatible with each other. I think there are people that are still using OpenID just because they were using it before and old technology never dies. But the way to go now is OpenID Connect. You wouldn't, I would not start with OpenID at this point. And as Mark said, OpenID Connect is a layer on top of OAuth 2. So it uses OAuth 2 for the authentication exchange and that workflow. But then OpenID Connect goes further than that and allows you to also get the user attributes in a standard way as part of the protocol.
It also has that really nifty auto discovery thing, so you don't have to set up all this configuration. You just have to say, okay, this is my username, password, and here's where you go look. And then it'll discover all that.
Yeah, that screen that he had with all the different ones, each one has a XML file that well-known something or other that has that negotiation information to allow you to find the bits that you need in order to authenticate.
Yeah, so if you're really curious, you could go look at each one of those links and you'd see how to connect. You just point to the URL and it's there. Oh, so it's sweet. So anyway, it did come up eventually. So let's see if this comes up quickly. Probably not. Oh, look, there we're on OrchID. It says, who are you? I say with my non-AZERTY key hands. My password is easy. I changed it just for this demo. Oh, let's see. Yeah, so if it works, really it does. And after you click login here, it takes you back and you see your username and it's beautiful. If only I had not changed my password to such a difficult thing that I guess somewhere out there on YouTube they've hacked me now and I'm gonna have to recover it. Anyway, so there we are. Any other questions?
Well, to use this ORCID on a server that's not connected to the internet,
It's not what?
connected to the internet.
Yes,
You can.
as long as your user can get to the internet.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you.
As a matter of fact, for testing, I have a virtual machine here, and as long as it could get out, as long as it could say, get the, I say yes, I'm sorry, I somewhat lied. I forgot, it has to go out and get that OpenID, the well-known URL. I'm sure there's a way to cache it. There has to be, right? Yes, there does. Come on, don't shake your head. It's a small matter of programming. So yes. You could also run the authentication server locally, but I'm pretty sure you can cache it. Look, if nothing else, put a cache for your wiki to use and just say, okay, well, they're looking for this. Here it is.
You showed that when you clicked on login, you were immediately redirected.
Yes.
So can I still have my local wiki users parallel to that, or do I have to decide?
Let's ask Cindy. Can he still have his normal users, his normal wiki users, as well as those who use, OpenID Connect? And you can have multiple OpenID Connect providers. So maybe you could set up an OpenID provider for your own. I don't know.
The MediaWiki authentication framework built into core allows you to have multiple authentication providers, and the pluggable auth extension allows you to enable local login, which is username, password, where the information is stored in the local database, in addition to pluggable auth with an additional provider. So you can have your local providers, your local login enabled, and you can also have multiple different remote providers. Right now, pluggable auth is currently restricted to a single pluggable auth plugin at a time, but that's something that could be changed in the codes that you
Right.
could have multiple ones.
But if all your providers have OpenID Connect, then you could just use all your providers.
Yes, so where you had, what was it, PayPal? and Microsoft and Google.
Yep.
What happens is if in your configuration file you specify multiple endpoints, that OpenID Connect configuration is an array, and you can have multiple values in there.
Yep.
And what happens is then if you go to the OpenID Connect page, it gives you a menu of endpoints, and you select one, and then it redirects you to the one that you selected.
Just a question to make sure I understand the added value. What I understand is you present something which can be used as a SSO portal for multi-tenant application, I would say. Because if I take our example in Railway, I showed this morning that we have several initiatives and solutions which are dealing with the same stakeholders and so on. So when we go to Ontario, to Rate Topo Model, to Ulinks, to AIFC, and we turn around, each time we have to log in. With such solution, that means that we would have a capability to have one high-level login with Orchid, for instance, and then have we could jump from one solution to another without having to log in each time.
I mean,
that's it?
It depends upon your application. Are they all wikis, or are they all separate applications? One's email and one's, I don't know.
No,
But yes, the idea, yes. Once you have, you could have a aggregator set up such that this guy knows about, this is like how Microsoft does Office 365. If you go to their login, you type in your email, and it takes you to your company's login.
Yes.
You could do something like that, and then, OpenID Connect works with that sort of
Yeah, okay.
login.
So that's, we know SSO, single sign-on,
Right.
inside companies because it's easy. You are in charge of the rule. So you can, but the complexity is when you are in an open world where you have a multi-tenant application, where it is in a community, where you want to increase performance.
Right, right.
And from what I understand, this would be a solution to get all the application related to, linked to Orchid.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Orchid is, okay, so Orchid itself is kind of targeted to researchers. I think that's what the R stands for in Orchid. But you could set up a similar sort of thing for your, or, you know, I got an Orchid ID, so I'm not a researcher. So if you wanted to abuse their system in that way, I'm sure you could.
Okay. Thank you.
I really think, though, that instead of abusing Orchid, probably should set up your own system for, you know, aggregating users. But anyway. Or find one that they already use.
So I just have one more comment. For a situation where you're using, reusing something like Orchid or Google for your authentication. So I do use for my wiki farm that I showed earlier with my graphs, I'm using OpenID Connect. So Wikimedia email is part of the Google G Suite. So my email address is a valid Google-provided email address. So I'm using Orchid with Google to log into my wiki, in my wiki farm, because I have credentials through work. But I don't want to let everybody who has a Google ID log into my wiki. So that's where the additional part, you know, that very first slide that Mark showed, saying the difference between authentication and authorization. So the first step is the authentication. You prove who you are, and that's done with Google. Then Pluggable Auth, which is the extension that the OpenID Connect extension builds on, has a second authorization step. And so I use a plugin called Email Authorization, where I can create a list of emails of people who are authorized to log into the wiki. So if you go through the OpenID Connect authentication process and it says, yes, we know who this person is, it then says, oh, but are they authorized to log into this wiki? And that allows you to limit the set of people. So you probably don't want to let anybody who has an Orchid log into your wiki. It's probably, if you've got an Orchid to prove who you are, plus some other measure of authorization. There's an LDAP authorization extension in addition to the LDAP authentication one. So you can use LDAP rules with Boolean expressions to limit the set of users that can actually log in.
Anyone else?
All questions are answered. Perfect. Yay. I need a caffeine break.